In previous videos, we've been reading broad narratives of the Book of Mormon through the lens of Hill's identification of the River Sidon with the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta River. We followed this lead because it was made in 1917, decades before radiocarbon dating was invented and Mayan hieroglyphics were first deciphered. Thus, no one can accuse us of shoehorning the Book of Mormon in this region to match modern archaeology, as none had existed when the theory was first proposed. Now, the following video is based on observations originally made by Brant Gardner, so see the bibliography for more details. In Helaman 3, we read the description of a group of people who migrated to a land that was an exceedingly long distance northward of Nephite lands, contains large bodies of water and many rivers, is home to people who are expert in the use of cement. It was land that had undergone deforestation and had a people who hailed from the land southward, i.e. Nephites and former Lamanites, and whose inhabitants began to cover the face of the whole earth. Between 200 AD to 600 AD, and from the perspective of someone living along the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta, the only area in the Americas that possibly matches these 6 criteria is the city of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is northwest from the central depression of Chiapas and the lowland Maya regions. It is in the Teotihuacan Valley, a side pocket of the Valley of Mexico. The Valley of Mexico being home to lakes Xaltocan, Texcoco, Xochimilco, and Chalco. Teotihuacanos made extensive use of cement, and it's thought that the destruction of the surrounding forests necessary for the burning of the limestone, which went into making Teotihuacano cement, caused the deforestation of the region. There was a strong southern/Mayan presence at Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan influence extended into the Gulf of Mexico, Oaxaca, and as far south as Guatemala. However, Mormon's account seems anachronistic. Helaman 3 does not describe the Teotihuacan of 50 BC. It describes the Teotihuacan of 250 AD and beyond. It does not describe the Teotihuacan of Helaman's day, but the Teotihuacan of Mormon's day, the late 300s AD. When writing the Book of Helaman, Mormon takes the time and effort to describe the migration to that what would eventually become Teotihuacan, because Teotihuacan was very much on his mind. The Teotihuacanos of Mormon's day were doing what the Gadianton robbers of Helaman's day were doing. They were usurping political power and disrupting the social order. The story in Helaman 3 allows Mormon to connect the two in his mind, the original Gadianton robbers and the enemies he was fighting in his own day. This also ties into a cyclical view of history, as we saw in earlier videos. It's important to remember that we don't know what the Teotihuacanos called themselves or their city. Teotihuacan is the name the Aztecs gave for what for them were impressive though abandoned ruins. The Mayan kings affiliated with Teotihuacan bore the title of Ochquincalomte, roughly translated as Western Autocrat. It is also likely that the Gadianton robbers of Mormon's day did not refer to themselves as such, but rather that for Mormon and Moroni, Gadianton was used the way the word mafia is used today, in describing organized crime syndicates, whether or not they originated in Sicily. Using the classic Maya lens to equate the Gadianton robbers of Mormon's day with the Teotihuacanos is important because going forward we'll see the role this or these factions played in the later revolution described by Mormon and Moroni. The historical content in 3rd Nephi and 4th Nephi can be summarized in the following way. During the years of 16 to 22 AD, the Nephites temporarily gathered in the lands of Zarahemla and Bountiful, fortified in a defensive position resembling but not identical to a scorched earth strategy. After winning the war between 30 AD and 35 AD, the Nephite government collapses. followed by a series of natural disasters which caused an abandonment of many, but not all, Nephite sites. Jesus Christ then appeared to a group of believers in Bountiful. Now, between about AD 1 and 250 AD, lowland Mayan peoples were migrating in ways that substantially differed from how they once moved between various sites in the past. Many Maya populations were moving away from lowland sites near natural water sources, whereas at one time, sites with E-groups had boomed into large public centers with elaborate temples and monuments. These same sites were now losing people to more defendable sites at higher elevations. The first Maya collapse in the first 2 centuries AD was a time of revolution in the Maya world. The culture, demographics, environment, and politics of the region changed rapidly and completely from what they had been before. In the Book of Mormon, between 35 AD to 200 AD, the old identities of Nephite and Lamanite came into disuse. A non-hierarchical and communitarian social order develops, but eventually gives way to more elaborate and socially stratified ones. Between 200 and 300 AD, Gadianton robbers come back onto the scene as traders and mercantilists. Wealth and social hierarchies become more pronounced, and other churches are established. The 3 Nephites were deposed, and believers in the original Nephite religion once again become a minority. As the Book of Mormon says, for 250 AD, the wicked part of the people began again to build up the secret oaths and combinations of Gadianton. The Gadianton robbers spread over all the face of the land and did traffic in all manner of traffic. In the Maya lowlands at about 250 AD, the old political culture of hereditary elites returned as Tikal and other sites became the headquarters of new powerful dynasties. Based on what little knowledge survived of the old script, the new elites developed a new writing system. The surviving texts from this new epigraphic tradition are what epigraphers can translate today. On a side note, this is also why pre-classic Mayan texts, except for numbers, are mostly undecipherable. Without a Mayan Rosetta Stone, a Mayan text written in classic era glyphs that we can read side by side with an equivalent text written in an older script, we may never know what the few surviving pre-classic inscriptions actually say. Much like the later Spanish destruction of indigenous books, the chaos and disorder of the first 2 centuries also resulted in the destruction of texts written on perishable materials. As alluded to earlier, Teotihuacan incursions catalyzed the formation of the classic Maya state. Classic Maya societies once again became organized states because Teotihuacano strongmen arrived at sites like Kaminalhuyu, Tikal, Homul, and Copan, took them over and recreated them in the image of Teotihuacan. In the Book of Mormon at around 326 AD, the Gadianton robbers are among the Lamanites and infest the land. By 330 AD, the land was filled with robbers and with Lamanites. Blood and carnage spread throughout all the face of the land, and it was one complete revolution throughout the region. By about 350 AD, the Gadianton robbers and the Lamanites are united in war against the Nephites. The Nephites are forced to enter into a treaty with the Lamanites and the robbers of Gadianton, in which they get the lands of their inheritance divided. By 400 AD, the Lamanites had hunted the Nephites down from city to city and from place to place. The Lamanites are at war with each other, and the whole face of the land is one continual round of murder and bloodshed. Speaking of Teotihuacan, Michael Coe once openly wondered whether these Teotihuacanos were warriors or traders. He concluded that the answer might be both. By Aztec times, in central Mexico, there was a special caste of armed merchants called Pochiteca, who traveled far and wide for goods and resources not available in central Mexico. These armed merchants existed in various forms as early as the early classic, the main evidence being representations of the Pochteca god at Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan was the center of a large military and commercial empire, possibly exceeding that of the much later Aztecs. Sites like Caminalhuyu, Homul, Tikal, and Copan were Teotihuacano strongholds in the Maya region, from which the Central Mexicans could acquire and send back goods and resources to their cement capital. In the Homul region at La Sufricaya, inscribed stele from AD 376 to 422, describe the same kinds of Teotihuacano incursion and influence found at Tikal and Caminalhuyu. Murals on the walls of La Sufricaya depict bands of warriors dressed in Teotihuacano clothing, armed with Teotihuacano-style weapons. Seated on the steps of a platform, these Pochteca receive offerings from locals, depicted as being dressed in a mixture of Teotihuacano and Maya clothing. At Tikal, Teotihuacano-style architecture and ceramics are cited as evidence for the same kind of Pochteca-style incursion. Beginning at around AD 400 and for the next 100 years, Tikal, with the help from the Central Mexican Teotihuacanos, cemented itself as the sole superpower in the Maya region. Tikal conquered key sites in the region along important trade routes, installing their own vassal kings to rule on their behalf, a situation not unlike that of much earlier King Lamoni and his brothers. One of these foothold cities was Copan, where in AD 426 Yaxcucmo arrived from Teotihuacan with the emblems of power and authority, establishing a dynasty which lasted almost 400 years. Copan is located near an important lowland-highland trade route, through which jade and obsidian were trafficked. Yaxcucmo also controlled the nearby site of Quirigua through his own vassal king, so as to secure the trade route. Shortly after 400 AD, the Guatemalan highlands also came under Teotihuacan domination. The architecture at Caminalhuyu, a highland Guatemalan site, imitated that of Teotihuacan, though archaeologists don't know if the use of Teotihuacano architecture and design was the result of direct Teotihuacano control or indirect influence due to intermarriage between Teotihuacano and Maya elites. If the river Sidon was the Rio Pasión tributary of the Usumacinta River, then that would have made the Nephite elites prime targets for removal. The Nephites would have been sitting on the nexus of multiple trade routes. Regime change, the establishment of new elites, is exactly what happened at those sites, and at the same time as it was happening in the Book of Mormon. So how does the Book of Mormon read with the help of Hill's guesses in 1917? Do his guesses about the Sidon, Usumacinta, East Sea/Caribbean Sea, and Narrow Neck/Tehuantepec converge with the archaeology that post-dates both him and the Book of Mormon? I'll let you decide that for yourself. Thank you.